built out multiple applications. We had a meeting note taker, something like a Fireflies or an Otter. We had enterprise search tool like Glean. We had some calendar management tools that we built out. We were just trying to see what works in the market. Where do businesses find value? And I think it became more like a 6 month of a tinkering lab at that point. And eventually, the enterprise search tool became what people started coming to us.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to AI's Happy Hour. In the world of artificial intelligence, there is a powerful promise and a painful reality. The promise is open source, a universe of powerful models like Llama and Mistral and many others, freely available to any builder with a bold idea. But the reality is the immense, often soul crushing difficulty of taking those brilliant models out of the lab and making them work reliably, securely, and at scale in the real world. It's a chasm where countless AI projects go to die. Today, we are talking to a founder who has dedicated himself to building the bridge across that chasm. Arko is the co-founder and CEO of PipeShift, a Y Combinator-backed company building the critical infrastructure for the open source AI revolution-led innovation. But what makes this story truly different and what we are here to unpack is that his journey as a founder did start with GPUs and machine learning models. It started with a mission to solve a deeply human problem, mental health. Arko, super excited to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, Sujit, and thanks for the intro. Just to probably shed some light on it, I think our journey started a lot longer, like long before our mental health care company, which was actually supposed to be a health tech company. We actually, as a team, all the co-founders, we started working together as part of a defense robotics nonprofit that we were building out. By trade, I'm a robotics engineer. My co-founder, Enrique, is a robotics engineer. The third co-founder, Pranav, he's an electronics engineer. So that's where we come from.
And all of you folks were studying together at Manipal Institute of Technology. Is that where it
Yeah, we
started?
were we were first we were Enrique was my roommate, and Pranav used to spend all of his hostel time in our dorm. So that's how we kind of started.
And was this part of like brainstorming to figure out what could you guys get started with, or was this something that you just suddenly started doing one day, or was this a process where you started thinking what could we build and can we build this together? Is that how it started?
Um, the robotics the robotics piece kind of started because we like to build out a lot of projects using back in the day Raspberry Pi, Arduino, and all of that. And then eventually we were like, well, how can we build it into a bit more functionable form factor? We were really enamored by what Boston Dynamics was able to achieve in the US. And we wanted to eventually build it out something like an offshoot from our college that eventually becomes a full-fledged robotics company. COVID came in and life had other plans at that point. We had to shut down our workshop. We were at that point a pretty decently sized team. We had funds coming in from people like Dassault Systems, NVIDIA, SICK Microsystems, all of these people. But then we kind of had to wrap all of it up because during pandemic the whole team had to disperse, and we wanted to do something in software. Healthcare seemed like a place where we could use a lot of our AI ML experience, and I think eventually with mental health care being one of the deeply underserved spaces in the Indian market, we decided to like double down on it. And we saw a lot more scalability with AI and ML models, some amount of NLP, early generations of models like BERT. But then eventually realized that we just didn't have a founder market fit there. With PipeShift, I think it started a lot later with a couple of other pivots and uh, post our experience with LLMs.
But I wanted to just double click, as in from robotics to solve defense use cases to suddenly figuring out health tech and specifically mental wellness. Was there something beyond just a problem statement that you identified? Was there a personal mission? You folks were motivated because you saw this as a growing problem to be solved? As in, was there something as a young engineers And then I'm sure there were several other problems that you could pick up and solve.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that no matter how much people shy away from, almost everybody has some kind of a experience around being able to not access easy or accessible care in India specifically when it comes to mental health care. And with COVID, everybody was like kind of back home. And in health tech, we felt like mental health, or to be honest, just some amount of uh, proactive care fundamentally could just help a lot of people who were just home. And I mean, it's not like as young adults we were having a great time just being locked up at homes during the pandemic. So I think keeping all of those things in mind, I think there was something personal for sure. Subconsciously, we had seen people around us not being able to access therapy um, that actively. Even if they did, it wasn't that effective because with the stigma and taboo that's attached to it, I think people don't end up um, following following like mental health care proactively. They feel like it's a one-time fix. It's not like it's 20, 30 years of your piled up problems. You can't solve that in a session. But I think people just drop off too quick. So I think we want to bring a bridge that probably technology would have solved for. And then the other side was probably the whole engineer's dilemma of healthcare being a lucrative sector that you want to build for and solve for because it's a deeply human problem that you fundamentally want to solve for. But I think there are enough founders that I've spoken to who have tried building something in healthcare and have pursued not to go ahead on the long term because of multiple challenges and scaling it, compliances, and all of that, which kind of makes it harder to build in that space. And I think that's what happened to us.
Interesting. And what was your single biggest lesson that you learned from the Amigo experience about, especially from a perspective, what it takes to build a sustainable business and beyond having a powerful mission, right? Like in this case.
I think there was a clear founder market mismatch. I think fundamentally how we look at it, I think after we got into YC, they put words into this notion that we were thinking about. And I think if I have to place it in the words of YC, it's something around building a company is already one of the hardest things to do in the world. If you're playing the hardest sport in the world, why not play something that you're good at? And as founders, we don't think we were the best health tech founders out there. So there was a clear founder market mismatch. And probably we were naive enough and ignorant enough to not accept it early on. But I think eventually we had to be honest to ourselves.
Cool. So one is that awareness and being able to consciously make that decision and move on. And then I think that is awesome. So that is a very powerful lesson. Now, you know what? I wanted to kind of set the stage perfectly for the second act, right? As in, or third act in your case, which is five shift. And you did mention that you and the founding team, because of your technical roots, you actually led this whole defense robotics uh, initiative during university days. And one of the use cases where you were trying to scale a Llama 2 powered enterprise application entirely on-prem. Was there a specific moment during that deployment experience, and you were calling that as the moment where you probably decided that we can actually solve this a lot better and we would want to scale it, and that's how PipeShift started off. But where was the pain of managing AI infrastructure, and why do you think it is so acute? And what got you to identify the core problem that you wanted to solve with PipeShift?
So I'll just take it back by 6 months of that moment. So what had happened was we had just winded down Amigo and we were like, what should we build? And we as founders love building together, at least we three as a team. And when people ask,
Right.
and then like just to digress for a moment, like when people ask us like, what's your moat as a company? We are like, three of us will always keep building together. We don't like most companies die because there's conflict. We don't think so there's going to be a conflict out there. And I
Which is awesome. I would want to double click on that dynamic also once we finish this
Yeah, so
this input.
so we three knew that we wanted to build something together and going forward as well. And that's when we were looking at what should we build. During our period at Amigo, we had a lot of work that we were doing. As engineers, you want to do high-tech work, you want to do fancy things, things that look magical. So we're using a lot of AI models over there, NLP models. Some of our friends in the Bay Area who were actually interning out of their undergrad in some startups, they had early access to models like the GPT-2, uh, and we had seen what these models could do. And we were like, why not just be ahead of the curve in this scenario and go and build out on it? Because we believe that there's going to be a technology shift. And being recent grads, I think we were best placed to get our hands dirty and learn from scratch on it, rather than people who need to unlearn 10 years of practice and then start building. I think that's how we started building on it. We built out multiple applications. We had a meeting note taker, something like a Fireflies on an Otter. We had enterprise search tool like Glean. We had some calendar management tools that we built out. We were just trying to see what works in the market. Where do businesses find value? And I think it became more like a 6 month of a tinkering lab at that point. And eventually, the enterprise search tool became what people started coming to us for because we had built out something like a RAG before RAG was a term. So we were using hybrid search, not just pure vector search. We were using LLMs to condense these chunks out. We were having like multi-threaded indexing on the back, all of the things that people do today in production for RAG. We were building all of that out, and I think an oil and we then ended up getting an oil and gas enterprise to start building with us, like start using us, and they were like, I need all of these things on plan. We had already deployed it a couple of times with something like a VLLM in production for some small companies. We had deployed a Llama 2 powered product, but then when this company came, they were like, I need a concurrency of 10 RPS. I have 5,000 employees at peak, and I need an infra that can scale across both my offices in India as well as in the US. And that's where we started seeing the problem. And we eventually realized that 3 months down the line of supporting that workload, about 70% of our team's bandwidth was just going in managing infrastructure. And we slowly started realizing that it's not about being able to deploy a model, a VLLM, TensorRT, whatever you want to use, they can give you like a decent performance. But going from decent to excellent, which is scalable, ultra low latency, cost efficient deployment that can keep performing at high concurrency and high scale, that's where people will start faltering. And that's where businesses will need infrastructure assistance, of course, given the fact that we believe that open source is going to be as big as closed source. Uh, so, so, so yeah, that's when we
And
decided to
and
double down.
awesome. And you still believe that open source is going to be bigger than proprietary black boxes?
I honestly believe that for businesses. I mean, I think how I look at the market is the closed source models are going to probably be the leaders in consumer use cases, and open source models are going to be the leaders in business use cases. And again, we take a lot of inspiration from Red Hat, our company named PipeShift, because we loved the story of how Red Hat had scaled OpenShift.
Cool.
Um,
Absolutely.
and very honestly, the whole notion that businesses now build on Linux than Windows and Mac is probably what we feel is going to happen on models as well.
Super cool. I will come back to PipeShift, and I love that inspiration from OpenShift. The the dynamic between founders or co-founders. Okay, and you mentioned that you folks would always love building together, and your moat is actually you three building together. Uh, I can understand when you're in the building mode, it's easy. Everyone's pivoting towards this common goal and hence focused.
Mm.
But when you're trying to make decisions where you're changing directions, like when you moved from the robotic solutions in the defense area to Amigo to then saying pipe shift, what's the decision making process between the three of you? How does it really work?
I don't think so. We had any process early on. I think that's one of the reasons why you see
Okay.
such drastic shifts between the industries that we go after. But in the last 2 years, I think there's enough clarity on that. For example, I mean, we have clear demarcations of like, there's no demarcation required. There's no pen and paper and no document that says this is what Orko should do, this is what Enrico
Uh-huh.
should do, this is what Pranav should do. I think we have worked together enough to know what each of us are good at and what each of us are probably uh, mm, like what each of us can actually excel at and where we should bank on each other. And I think that kind of is what now propels us. So, for example, if there's a now how we look at even in PipeShift, we have like probably pivoted our positioning, ICP, and everything for the last 12 odd months, like at least 3 to 4 times. And I think in all of those decisions, it's more around figuring out as founders, what do we believe is working? What do we believe is not working? And probably because we have spent so much time together and we know each other from like when we were 17, 18, I think we are honest to each other. So, for example, if I'm shying away from saying something that maybe this might work or this might not work. If we have conversations like these, Pranav will probably call it out and be like, "That's not true. This is how it's going. Just be honest to us." And same thing on the product side. If there are delays or there's anything going on, we kind of are pretty honest to each other. I think that allows us to understand how we as a team want to focus on like which metric we as a team want to focus on. And that metric kind of guides us towards the industry or the kind of customers we want to go for. I can dive deeper into it as we converse because of what PipeShift has become from when we are
Cool.
started. And I think that will probably reflect the
Let's
decision
do
making.
that. Let's do that. Let's talk about the problem that PipeShift is solving, right? You did describe in our pre-recording briefing conversation that you described PipeShift as Heroku or Vercel for open source LLMs, which is a fantastic analogy for our technical listeners. For everyone else, can you help paint a picture for us, especially from a customer, an enterprise customer who wants to use an open source model environment? It could be Llama or anything else that they want to choose. What does the world look like before PipeShift? And what are the first one or two things that you're able to deliver via your platform that gives them that aha moment? I know your aha moment that got you to say, let's focus on this problem with PipeShift. But what's the aha moment for the customer when they experience their world changing with PipeShift?
Um, so how we place it is Inference 1.0 and Inference 2.0. So Inference 1.0, according to us, is what happened in the last 2 years, which is token-based APIs, tons of routers, tons of serverless endpoints that and shared endpoints that people build on to figure out which model works, what use case works, and try to scale that out. Inference 2.0 is fundamentally what we believe scaled up production workloads require. And Inference 1.0, we just believe is built for playgrounds and toys. For as much as we can, it might sound a bit brash, but that's how we look at it at the moment. And what I mean by that is, let's say you are a company that has scaled up your workload to a point where you now have a stable workload that's having decent usage. Now, what you need to double down on is probably 10xing that user experience, 10xing that reliability on that deployment, and making sure that deployment is scaling predictably with predictable scaling costs. You should not go from with serverless endpoints. What we've seen with customers is suddenly they're at $3,000 a month, and in 6 months they're on $15,000, $20,000 a month. Um, the API is the same. The reliability is not there because it's shared endpoints. There's a noisy neighbor problem where other people using the service might have a spike and your performance takes a hit. Um, every serverless endpoint goes down. So you have routers that are actually routing your APIs to 5, 6 different endpoints and figuring out which is the fastest. That actually bloats your costs out by 4 to 5 times. And as you are scaling, the scaling cost is just unimaginably high. We have people who have scaled from $3 to $50,000 in a span of literally 9 months. And that's where we are kind of coming at, and we are like, all of what you get today with serverless APIs is a one size fits all API that has maybe 150 tokens per second, 200 millisecond API latency, and it's deployed in, let's say, US West. But for your use case, you need maybe under 3 second end-to-end response time or maybe 100 millisecond end-to-end latency at a concurrency of 50 consistently at P99 in US, Europe, and Southeast Asia at the same time. You are not able to do that with serverless endpoints. You need a custom deployment right from hardware to the model that is reconfigured in order to give you that SLA, and that should have predictable scaling costs on top so that you know that once I hit this concurrency, how much can I scale with this infra and what's the next scale up cost going to look like. And you should have the replication of that deployment in any cloud or any region to have the best cost versus performance ratio for the customers that are actually interfacing your product from that region. And that's fundamentally what we have kind of realized with PipeShift, and that's what we solve for, which is inference 2.0, and which is SLA compliant, reliable inference, where you just come to us and tell us that this is the latency we want, this is the concurrency we want, this is the speed we want, and this might be the cost range that we want. We will figure out what's the best infrastructure solution to give you a combination of all of it and set all of it up in a dedicated fashion for costs that are actually significantly lower than what a CSP would offer today to you.
Well, I think what you just painted is such a complex requirement as organizations really try to think of scaling their AI use cases, but it is easier said than done. I genuinely believe that you folks are solving a very critical problem and taking away a lot of the unpredictability that enterprises face as they scale, and which kind of becomes a barrier to adoption, frankly, for AI a lot of the times in enterprise environments. Now, you made a strong bet on open source models, and you did call out being the Linux for enterprise AI, as in that's what open source is going to be. This powerful customizable engine running behind the scenes. You also see that there is this the gap between the top end open source models and closed source models is continually shrinking. Do you see that that will continue to be the case? Or this whole thing of being able to take these models and building your own models is going to be another way that organizations can solve the gap of open source not being as close as closed source for outcomes, especially accuracy of solving specific use cases. And in this case, as in, I also want to hear from you, what have you heard from customers? As in, what becomes a key differentiator in terms of choice between open source versus closed source? Is it just cost? Is it control or the ability to deeply specialize these models for their unique data and use case?
I think just to answer it backwards, cost is not even the first factor. People think open source is just cheaper tokens. And I think that's, you're doing a disservice to the actual uh, ability and the degrees of freedom that open source opens up for you. Cost is not even like the top three reasons for going to open source. Um, I can probably answer this entire question with a couple of things. Firstly, we don't believe that open source is anywhere behind. I mean, and open source and closed source are not very different. I think open source is just slightly behind on the timelines compared to closed source. And it makes sense as well because honestly, if you look at the market believes in discovery first. And if you look at open source and closed source is built for discovery, open source is built for reliability. People should not depend on Llama to discover if a use case works for them. So, giving that, like just drawing from that analogy, if a company is starting today or they're trying to discover some new use cases of what LLMs or um, STT pipelines, TTS models can actually do today, they should go for the closed source model first because those models are going to be the first ones to give them the first validation of the use case. So build on these use cases, build on these models, and open source comes in fundamentally not as a cost problem. It come or a discovery or a solution to discovery. Open source comes in as a reliability and scaling solution. What I mean by that is I can probably take the example of this CTO. He runs a he's the CTO of a company that runs large scale e-commerce uh, operations across the US. And my conversation with him was pretty much very straightforward. He was like, I don't believe in open source. This is how he started like 9 months back. He was like, I don't believe in open source. OpenAI, Anthropic, they're gonna keep making the models better. So there's no point of me betting against it. I should just keep building with them and build my in products in a way that I can plug in the next OpenAI model or the next Anthropic model. Now my conversations with him like a month back were on the lines of how can he actually start using a GPT OSS or a DeepSeek or a Llama for reinforcing three of his use cases that have actually stabilized and scaling. And his reasoning towards that is the fact that now he's seeing that tomorrow, if a Claude Sonnet 4.5 becomes like even 20 times better on solving for software development, it does not change its capabilities on customer support. That's a use case that he has actually scaled upon. What actually gives him more value on customer support is if he can take that Sonnet for API, which is 50 tokens per second, and push that to 150 to 200 tokens per second in speed, reduce the latency of that API, and actually scale that use case with more functions. And then what I mean by that is now function calling is a thing, tool calls are a thing, people are using MCP servers. So latency on every API call is just bloating out more and more. And that's where people are seeing the problems on, say, scaled up use cases, which is now I want to bring the latency down because I want more tool calls into it. And that the next best API that comes out from the closed vendor does not solve for. That's where you need to bring in open source. You have to be like, okay, I have this use case that's validated. Let's use some of our data that we have from the use case, train these models to bias it a bit to the use case, but let's get the speed and latency benefit of open source. And the second thing that this person told is out of the three use cases, one of those use cases were going stably. It was stable, but he woke up to a feature flag which was 20% higher than the last night. And it's literally, he started seeing the feature flags being around the quality of the model. They did not understand what happened. And fundamentally, what happened was that Claude 4 came out, and the quality of 3.7 APIs that they were using got degraded without any announcement. And that's when he's like, I just wanted to run stably and reliably. I want to control my model releases. I want to control the release cycles. So that's again where open source comes in. That's why when you're scaling and when you want reliability, that's where open source is the best solution. It's not cost. Cost comes in as the third or fourth factor because it gives you predictable scaling cost for your use case.
Very interesting. While you called out that costs is probably number three and number four, while I was going through your website, you do have some impressive metrics on your site, right? Like 60% reduction in just GPU compute costs. How do you achieve that? I just wanted to dive a little further down, and I know there is some more interesting things, including the magic framework, but we'll come to that. Is it through more efficient scheduling, better model optimization, or helping companies use the right size models for the job instead of a massive expensive one? And then what's the framework or approach that you take to be able to help actually cut down the compute cost?
I think it's a mix of both. For all use cases, you don't require the largest model. And what I mean by that, even in open source, we have customers who use the Quen coder, which is 480 billion parameters. We have customers who use Kimi K2, which is over a trillion parameters. Those are large models that people use. But for a lot of latency sensitive use cases, they would rather use a GPT OSS 20 billion. They would or use a Llama 8B or a 70B parameter model because that's more than enough for usual voice use cases where they want conversational data, and most models today are good at that. So that's one layer, like picking the right model. In most of the cases, we feel like the customers already come to us with the model that they want to use. I think their biggest bottleneck is getting more out of these models from a compute perspective. And that's only because not every framework is ideal for every single type of use case. Just to give you a sense of it, there are different inference frameworks like VLLM, TGI, TensorRT. They all have different trade-offs. They all have different kinds of metrics that they can solve for at scale. On top of that, you have more optimizations that you can do to further tune these frameworks. And then there are additional pieces like speculative decoding and all that you can add to actually speed things up. But what people forget is speculative decoding does not work very well when you increase the concurrency on them. So in some cases, you should rather not do that and rather increase the way you're deploying the model. Do you shard it across four GPUs? Do you replicate the deployment across four different GPUs? even these things. And that's where people start faltering out. And fundamentally, that's what we solve for. We have, I mean, you mentioned magic. So just to give you a quick line on it, we have this internal framework on which the entire platform is built out called modular architecture for GPU inference cluster, uh, which becomes like, which is the abbreviation of magic. And one of our customers kind of helped us come up with it. They were like, this looks like magic. And we were like, okay, why not just name it magic? So that allows us to do this.
Yeah, unpack it a little bit for us. That'll be awesome. Just unpack a little bit, as in what is the magic framework? As in, I think the audience will really love that.
So fundamentally, it's an end-to-end inference orchestration pipeline that allows you to
Uh-huh.
customize everything from the model to the silicon. So you can change like based and all of it is dependent on five metrics: cost, concurrency, quality, throughput, latency. And in every use
Hmm.
case, you need a very different combination of all of these five metrics, is how we believe. So you might have a document processing or a transcription pipeline where cost is what you want to optimize for because it's batched use case. You don't need the lowest latency. You don't need the fastest speed. You want the lowest cost per hour of transcription. You might have document processing pipeline where it's just, like you need the cheapest tokens per second. You need the cheapest token price. You might have a voice agent where latency is your anchor SLA, and you want to anchor the entire stack around latency. So based on what the anchor SLA is, or what's the combination across these five metrics, Magic can actually reconfigure the entire stack right from the underlying GPU, which is it can be an L4 and L40S for batch workloads. It can be sometimes H100s if these are large scale workloads. If these are latency sensitive workloads at large scales, we'll probably move to a Blackwell machine. Do what kind of KV cache layer do we operate on? What kind of CUDA kernels we ship on top of these base inference frameworks? Like we have custom CUDA kernels for latency, throughput, that are optimized for batch workloads, real-time workloads separately. So which kind of CUDA kernel should go on top of these base inference frameworks? Which inference framework should we actually build the entire stack on top of for that use case? So all of this is customizable. And that's what we have kind of productized over the last 12 to 13 months. So today, if a customer comes to us, they just tell us that I want GPT OSS 120 billion running at least 500 tokens per second in US West and US East both, and I want an end-to-end end-to-end request latency of under 3 seconds at P95. We go ahead and benchmark our pipelines, reconfigure Magic for that use case, set all of it up, give them an API to test in the next day. If it's good to go, then they go ahead and start building on it. It's dedicated, isolated. We set up a dedicated VPC and Kubernetes cluster for them, so there's no noisy neighbor problem. And that gives them predictable cost on how they can scale, how much they can scale, and if they have to scale up, what would the scale up look like in the same region or a different region.
Very cool. I have a question from a customer's perspective. Okay. Most of the customers, like you mentioned, have probably been running pilots, proof of concepts. They would start with the proprietary black boxes, as I call them. Um, they've identified their use cases that they will probably put into production and scale. But you know what? When it comes to probably starting off with the open source environment, they don't even know what are the right questions to ask and find answers to before they make choices like model environment. What do they require from a latency perspective, from a throughput perspective? What would really matter to the use cases? And do you have a framework that customers could really use to kind of probably navigate this journey of decision making?
I think it goes down to the um, basics of any company, which is if you're a company that solves for sleep, you will probably be a successful company. And we came up with this when that customer actually told us that I woke up to 20% more flags because I saw degradation of my API. And then that's where we kind of came up with a thought process that how do we actually make sure that he sleeps peacefully? And I think just going back to your question, what are the metrics that kind of help you sleep more peacefully? I know a lot of voice agent companies would have things around reliability of their APIs. Like if you look at people who are running on APIs from a company like Grok, it's really, really unstable. The reliability is just not there from in peak hours, and they're not able to actually scale as much. Um, with if they want under 200 millisecond latencies, sometimes they'll have server errors. That's why they start using routers, and routers make it even a bigger problem because every time you are routing to five different servers to figure out which one has the lowest latency, so your costs are five times higher. Anyway, so for your use case, I think be very true to what should be the fundamental SLA or the core anchor metric across the five I mentioned, which is it uh, it can be it can be a combination of them also. It can be a concurrency plus latency problem that you want to actually solve for that will actually add business value to you, which is what, say, that customer success use case that I was talking about has, which is I am scaling and I want lower latencies because I'm adding more tool calls. Um, a second use case of voice agents might be you don't need the fastest tokens per second because you're only generating 50 to 100 tokens. What you need is the fastest TTFT or latency. So there you only solve for latency. You might have a batch use case where you have transcriptions going on, you have document processing pipelines going on. Why do you need an API that gives you 500 tokens per second over there? What you should rather go for is a API that can finish up that transcription job or that document processing job in a period that your SLA meets, let's say 1 minute, 2 minutes, whatever it might be, and that should be done round the clock in a reliable fashion, maintaining that SLA. So that's where you can optimize for cost. So you can figure out what's the anchor SLA on concurrency based on what's the duration. And based on that, you can also define what's the cost range. And then you can reconfigure the entire infra to anchor around cost rather than anchoring around latencies and speeds. Because if you're just processing documents and you want that document to be available 10 minutes later or 5 minutes later as an SLA, what's the point of you using a 500 tokens per second API? That's fundamentally how we look at it, and that's how we tell people to look at it. In terms of customers, they usually don't have these kinds of frameworks in place. So what they do is they just come to us and they're like, these are our problems. And then we just have one conversation with them to understand where the problem is coming from. So it can be a degradation problem. It can sometimes be my latencies are too high, and my or sometimes my costs are going from 3,000 to 50,000 in 6 months, and I need to do something about it at the moment. Otherwise, it's just going through the roof. For use cases that I don't need to evaluate more proficient models for, rather I want latencies and other pieces to optimize for. So I think customers usually tell us what kind of problems they're facing, and we have to gauge from it. Or we let them go back and think about it, and they come back to us with one or two of these metrics.
Great. Look, I think that will be super helpful for especially the audience who's actually building or trying to build it and consume it both. I wanted to double click and move to the partnership ecosystem aspect because it's such a complex problem. Obviously, PipeShift is the kind of sophisticated software which I would say was still one half of the equation. The other half is ensuring that it runs on infrastructure in the backend that is performance, scalable, and cost effective. Um, can you talk about the importance of the ecosystem, especially when what is the kind of partnership value that a customer can unlock when a specialized provider like PipeShift, along with an AI native cloud platform like Neysa Velocys, and the value that it can unlock for customers, irrespective of whether they are building AI or they just want to consume AI?
I think fundamentally it gives customers an option at scale. The reason being that everybody starts with this whole credit trap of big three. They start with that, they start building with that. And once they're scaled up, there's no way to get out of it unless they actually see an alternative. And the only alternatives they see in the market are serverless compute vendors or just compute vendors who are giving the cheapest compute price. But what they forget is on AWS, you have a Bedrock or Vertex AI on GCP that allow you to have a stable deployment if you want on a dedicated GPU or a node, and that allows you to scale on that API. And everything is just matched up with the platform. So I think PipeShift brings in that expertise of how do you deploy models, manage models, scale models really well. And I think AI native cloud or AI native neo cloud like Neysa, I think allows customers to actually get the true benefit and actually get rid of all the bloated pricing and middleware layers that kind of the big three adds on top. And fundamentally, what we have seen with customers is the benefits are two-pronged, where our software stack is able to give them significantly higher throughputs and performances or capacity on their compute, but that compute can't just sit and cost like $50,000 a month, which is what something like a big three costs. And that kind of hinders the shift from closed to open source. Because if you're on a serverless API with closed source, moving to a serverless API for open source doesn't make much sense for you because it's a model that by default might just not work for all use cases out of the box. So you would rather want to do something that's more stable. And once you try to do something more stable, your first dedicated infra cost is one GPU comes at $5,000 a month, which is not a good place to start off. And I think that's where, because these big three providers kind of have an issue of helping you reduce TCO, or even what they give you an account is an account executive that can increase your token quota. They'll not come in and reconfigure the stack to optimize for latency for you. So that's where I think a combination of an AI native um, platform, AI native cloud platform like Neysa, and an optimization, inference optimization layer at PipeShift can actually come together, not just reduce your TCO, but also increase the scale that you can achieve for that TCO by anchoring around the quality of service and SLAs that that you today are not having from your account executives from these cloud providers. Because all they end up giving is I have increased your quota in terms of these many throughput units. So that's fundamentally where I believe there's a huge benefit for customers. And there's nothing better than having stable infra that like self-hosting your models when you're at scale. Because any downtime is going to be your customer loss. Any downtime is going to cause you to pay for SLA issues. And how we place it is that today you are defining your SLA based on what you are getting from the API provider. Fundamentally, if you're a tech first company, you should define your SLA and then build your infra according to it, not the other way.
But I think that is very useful insight and input, Arko. I, I I want to come back to your global strategy in a moment, but I wanted to quickly dive into a fun segment. This is called the founder stack. Okay. These are quick questions. Uh, you just need to respond with top of mind answers. Let me know if you're ready. Cool. You've actually gone from building a mental health app to building AI infrastructure solutions. What's one non-technical tool? It could be a book, a habit, or a mental model that was essential in helping you navigate both massive personal and professional pivots.
I think I write a lot on pen and paper. I think that is one piece. I have this whole notebook that I don't go back to. It's just anything I think about, I just scratch and scribble on the notebook. I probably have never opened it after that, or I turn the pages. I don't turn the pages either. But classic pen and paper. Even though I love typing, I like digitizing everything, keeping everything digitally. I think that has definitely helped me. There's no classic book or anything that has kind of helped us navigate all of these. I think it just allows us to. I think classic pen and paper gives me enough clarity whenever I'm thinking of something, having a conversation, want to note down something, reflect on something. I think there's nothing better than that, no matter how many notions come in the world.
I couldn't agree more. Plus one. Okay. If PipeShift as a platform had a personality, what would it be? As in, would it be like this meticulous librarian, a calm air traffic controller, or something else? How do you visualize it as a personality?
I think, again, might be a bias, but we always go back to cars as an analogy, probably because all three of us love cars. I think an F1 driver. I think an F1 driver is what TypeShift would be. Specialized to deliver performance uh, in conditions that are actually requiring professional practice. I think that's how we look at it.
Super cool. Okay, you actually helping. obviously you're trying to solve for developers and users across the world, and I think you operate out of two continents. What is one unsolvable everyday problem in any of the cities that you or your teams operate out of that you wish you could fix with a simple, elegant solution?
I don't think so. There's something specific in the Bay Area that I would solve for at the moment. I think, but definitely when I was in Bangalore, the roads. I think that's one of the pieces, like the roads and the traffic. I know everybody talks about it, but I think fundamentally we have seen the difference. If you can go from SF to San Jose in like 40 minutes, 45 minutes, you can't go from Indiranagar to HSR in that much time. Here you are traversing cities, and that sucks a lot out of productivity as founders and as knowledge workers. And I think it would do a lot of good if there was any way to solve that. I don't know what's the solution to it at the moment.
There's no simple, elegant solution to it
Yeah,
right now.
but I would love to have a
No,
solution to
but
it.
okay, I would want to double click on the
Mm.
same thing, right? You're operating out of two continents, beyond obvious costs, benefits, etc., which a lot of folks speak about. What does this dual continent playbook really unlock for a deep tech company like yours, right? In terms of talent, market access, or just sheer resilience? As in, is there something that you figured out as the perfect balance of operating between these two continents?
Still figuring out. I wouldn't say I've figured it out. My sleep cycles have been a mess for the longest time. But having said that, I think there's definite advantages. I wouldn't place cost benefit as one because I feel like it's not significantly different from India, like from the US at the moment, because the best AI talent is also getting paid really well from Bay Area companies, even in Bangalore. I know engineers in Bangalore who make Bay Area level salaries. So keeping that in mind, I think so there's a fundamental cost benefit. I think there's a deep talent access that we as founders can unlock by having networks in both the ecosystems where you have the highest amount of AI builders in the world, barring China. So US and India being two of the largest markets where AI adoption is happening. Um, I think having access to engineering talent in both of these, I think, is just significantly uh, like builds a significant piece of the resilience as a company that we can have. And also that all and also I think coming back to our fundamental belief as a business, um, we are a bit opinionated as a company. We are a bit opinionated towards what we build, what we believe should be built into a product. We believe, I mean, you should take feedback, but there's also the feedback where people want faster horses. They don't know about cars. So that's you should always take it with a pinch of salt. So we always have some opinion into what feedback we should take, what feedback is probably not ideal. And that's one piece that allows us to all that's one piece that allows us to also build the company from a very product and customer first lens rather than a tech first lens. So when I said that we sell sleep, and it also translates to the fact that we don't build a developer platform, we sell outcomes. A customer coming to us should be able to tell us that this is the latency we want, this is the cost we want, this is the kind of scale we want, and we will deliver that outcome. We will not give them a developer platform to build on top of. And I think that whole selling sleep also ties into how well we can support these customers. And I think being cross-competent just helps us to give them 24/7 support. Because we have the best engineers, we have the best engineers who understand GPU workloads available for you around the clock. And I think that's just customer delight on steroids.
Yeah, you spoke about sleep from a customer's perspective, where you want to ensure that they can sleep
Yeah,
better, and then you also spoke about operating a dual continent
yeah.
team construct means less sleep for you. But is there one tool, ritual that you and your co-founders actually follow that's been critical to keep teams across both these continents super aligned and moving fast? Because it isn't easy
Yeah,
when you have distributed teams,
agreed.
especially when you have to build at this pace. So, how do you really solve for that? Is there a ritual, process, tool, anything that you folks follow?
I think um, again, like the sleep cycle is less messed up because of customers or product. It's more messed up because of compliances because we just keep getting OTPs for different compliances. So I think that's the reason it's more messed up. But having said that, I think a couple of things that we kind of do is we have really clear hours where we overlap. And that allows us to actually fundamentally build it from the point of view that the teams will have alternate day sync ups. We will actually be aligned on what we are doing, what we are not doing. Something that we were not doing for the longest time is getting the team together on just a no context call where we just have fun, talk about the things that are happening, talk about things in life that are happening across the team members. It's a small team of 10 people, so it's much easier to do that at the moment. So I think that's a cadence that we've started. Every 3 to 4 weeks, we kind of come together as a team for a couple of hours, just jamming on what's going on in everyone's life, not about work. Of course, I give them product. I think one key problem that we had seen early on was there was a disconnect because we were only discussing work. And I think there was a disconnect on where the company is going, what's the vision. We went through 2, 3 pivots since PipeShift was formed. Like, what are these pivots for? I think communicating that as a founder became really critical, and I think I made some mistakes early on in being able to communicate that well. And I think that's what we now do. We're like every 3 to 4 weeks, we just align the team that this is what we solve for, this is what we are building, this is who we are building it for, and also take feedback in because I mean, it's this. These are the people that are working on the stack more than anyone else out there. These are probably one of the few engineers in the world that are actually spending 100 to 150 hours, uh, like 100 to 150 hours a week just building GPU infrastructure or optimizing inference infrastructure. So they would definitely have valuable feedback. So just taking feedback a lot of feedback from the team. That's where we reduce our opinions a bit, and we're like, okay, just give us feedback as a team, because these are also engineers. So I think these are some of the rituals that keep us close. A lot of things that we want to do are the traditional pieces like offsites and all. We want to do those. We want to bring in best practices across the Bay Area and Bangalore in both the ecosystems. So I think those are things that are in the plan. But I think fundamentally, just having a cadence with the team that's no agenda, not related to work. It does not have to be an expensive vacation. It just needs to be a time where you just don't discuss work for 2 hours. Um, yeah,
Awesome. Yeah, it's thoughtful, intentional connection and communication. I think, well, thank you for highlighting that. A lot of us take that very lightly, but I think that is still the bedrock for ensuring that teams really come together and are able to operate with a similar culture. Uh, you touched upon the unique value of building in the Bay Area when we were having our pre-recording conversation. What is that value for you today? As in, is it proximity to customers, the specific type of engineering talent, or just the sheer density of AI innovation and the speed with which that's happening?
mix of all of them, I would say. Yeah, I think um, access to the first stage, like I think access to the earliest adopters of something. That's the fundamental thing. I mean, of course, that translates to customers. So I feel the customers are way more mature here. Conversations are way more mature. So you can actually see what comes to the larger global market in like 6 months to 12 months period. I think that's definitely one. And talent is the second biggest priority. I think talent will precede the first point going forward. I think initially when we were just figuring out problem statements, I think talent was the secondary piece to solve for. I think now talent is probably the first thing going forward. 6 months later, I think talent will be the biggest priority. Like there's no density of high skilled infra talent anywhere else in the world, apart from China, where you can actually, apart from the Bay Area, like you need to be here to actually build out a large scale infrastructure outcome. And fundamentally, it's also as founders, uh, I think ambition. I don't think so. Indian founders dream as big to start off. And I think that ambition kind of, and the caveat being that's specifically around like deep tech. around deep tech. And the caveat being there's zero inspirations or ambitions, like ambitious outcomes that you can see in the market if you are sitting in Bangalore. I think for us, we just drive through, like we drive down the interstate and we are seeing Pure Storage, Databricks, um, and tons of other companies, Nutanix. They're like, you go to an event and you meet SVPs and VPs and CXOs of these companies, which are all IT, data, infrastructure, cloud infra. And then that kind of rubs on you. You can actually see the empires that these companies have built out. So your ambition of what you can build out also just suddenly skyrockets. And I think that's what Bay Area does to you as a founder. And then that rubs off to your team from there.
Plus one. That's valuable insight from your experience, Arko. And then, and it's been an amazing insider look into your entire journey, right? And the engine that you're building at PipeShift. For a final segment, right, I want to kind of zoom out. Now, you obviously are in a very unique position. You have a foot in both epicenters of AI in the US and the emerging AI ecosystem in India. China obviously is a different wall garden right now. Let's start with the future of open source. Where do you see this ecosystem in 5 years? Even if you really had to place your bets and visualize what would this look like, and that could also define the roadmap or journey for PipeShift.
Um, Fundamentally, I believe that uh, open source is pretty much gonna govern almost all production use cases in the next 5 years. Um, you're seeing that more and more with customers facing the problems of production today. I think 2 years back, nobody knew what the production problems are going to look like. And that kind of also means that in 5 years, we also believe that there are going to be open source models that are at par with any closed source model. Just because there's only limited data that you can use, limited capabilities that you can feed into a model on a year-on-year basis. So it's all becoming like every dollar is going to have diminishing returns. So you'll probably get into more modalities. But for example, LLMs would probably stabilize with two, three closed source models from Gemini, or be it Gemini, be it OpenAI, be it Anthropic, and Llama, Mistral, DeepSeek, Quen, Kimi, uh, all of these, uh, all of these as the open source side. And I think there will be a large amount of consensus in the market that production use cases need to shift to open source. And I think we are, and I think we are also seeing that more and more uh, closed source companies are going towards consumer products. They're doubling down on products rather than only models, which also means that they are also believing in that consumer market is probably the best market for closed source. And for open source, I believe that's just what's going to happen. Models are going to just catch up. Today, if you have a 3 to 6 month lag behind the best open source and best closed source model, it'll probably be days or weeks. And that definitely is the market that we believe PipeShift can serve for, because once you're in production, inference is not a problem that you should solve for as a product company, because all you will end up then doing is solve for inference. And that's our wedge. Like again, Red Hat used to say, it's not about Red Hat selling the most technical pitch around Linux. They just wanted to sell you a reliable, stable deployment of Linux as an enterprise with a line to somebody that you can call if something goes down. And that's pretty much what we sell at PipeShift. I'm not selling you I mean, of course, we have a platform that has tons of capabilities, but it's not a dev tool pitch. It's not a developer experience pitch. It's a business outcome pitch. If you are scaling, can we reduce your latencies? If you're scaling and you want stability and you have a parallel open source model that works for you, can we bring that in and give you reliability? And I think it's just gonna keep growing. And inference is fundamentally a market that's just coming towards us rather than a market that we need to go towards. And I think that's how we look at it. Couple of things that we don't believe is are gonna exist are, again, it might come from the opinionated piece that I mentioned. We don't believe evals routing, those are not businesses that should exist 5 years down the line. Fundamentally because every company for every company, evals is their holy grail. It will be custom to every company. There is no one size fits all over there. And every company will build their own evals. We are seeing this with more and more production companies. that they're building out evals, they're moving evals in-house. And routing is something that will cease to exist because once people are, it's a duct tape solution for when people are on serverless going into production because now they're seeing the pains of production. Once they see what Inference 2.0 looks like with companies like PipeShift, that whole routing layer does not exist at that point. You will have stable APIs, so you don't need to route to 5 different APIs or 10 different APIs to find what works for you.
Super cool. Thank you for sharing that perspective into the future, right? And I'm going to come to tapping into your experience for founders. Right now, India is amongst the top three in terms of AI skill penetration. But founders, especially deep tech founders here, still face immense challenges, particularly around funding and access to compute, talent resources. Based on your journey, what is the single most important piece of non-obvious advice you would give to a deep tech founder in India today?
Don't do shuttling, just move full time, very honestly. And the reason I say that is because uh, there's, if they truly want to build as a deep tech founder today, maybe 5 years later it'll look different. But today also, there's barely any capital that you can get um, that's actually intelligent capital. Uh, and it's saddening to say that, saddening to see that. But I feel like 5 years down the line, you might have founders who have made it big in the Bay Area, in India, who are actually becoming VCs, and they'll probably rework the ecosystem. But even today, it's just private equity kind of mindset. It doesn't work with deep tech. You have gestation periods that are much longer. You have outcomes that need years worth of building. Of course, there are a few people who are resilient enough to keep building it out, but that does not mean that the other, like that one person out of the 10 should be the only one that should exist. The other nine should also exist. And if the ecosystem makes it harder for them to exist, they should just probably switch the ecosystem at that point. Because 10 years down the line, you don't know if you will exist or you'll have another chance to build out that company.
Hmm, that is poignant, but I hope the ecosystem
I
will
hope that
change.
too.
But thank you for
I hope
giving
that
that
too.
input.
I think fundamentally the
Arko,
advice that I have been getting initially was keep shuttling, go every quarter. We don't
uh,
believe that works.
uh,
If you're actually building it out today in deep tech, you want to have decent scale, decent capital, and actually build out large outcomes. Un Unfortunately, the ecosystem is just not ready for it yet.
yeah, I would agree with you at this point in time. Yeah, a lot of us are trying to work and change
I
that.
agree.
But Arko, thanks for sharing that. You know what? It's been absolutely fascinating, Arko. As in, I obviously went all over the place, but I think I found amazing nuggets that I wanted to kind of uncover and surface for our audience. Your journey from building a platform to support, as in robotics in defense, to the human mind, to building a solution for solving for infrastructure for the AI world is a powerful story of learning, pivoting, and persisting. And I'm sure it has not been easy, but I guess all of you together are having a ball of a time while doing that. And it's also a reminder, right, as you are closing with some of your perspective and thoughts, is best builders are actually the ones who solve problems they have lived themselves. And it's been an absolute privilege to kind of unearth that. And thank you for being absolutely upfront with all your thoughts, Arko. Really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. And I think it's just for anyone building, I think just I want to end it on something that Dalton used to tell us during YC, uh, which
Uh-huh.
is raising the highest money doesn't give you success. Companies don't die of indigestion, they die of like companies die of indigestion, they don't die of starvation. Your
Very
fundamental
true.
fundamental metric is just don't die. Like keep at it. If of course, if the market is coming towards you, if it doesn't come this year, it'll come in 2 years. And I think that's what we are seeing with Inference. We stuck around, and I think it's the right time, right place.
Oh, that's a great perspective and advice, Arko. Thank you for closing with that. Thank you. This was amazing. Folks, thank you for logging in to learn more about PipeShift and how they're making open source AI production ready for enterprises. Visit pipeshift.com. Don't forget to subscribe to AI's Happy Hour, folks, for more conversations like this one with people building our future. Until next time.